The bullet tore through Mason Novak's shoulder as he stumbled into the dusty street of Kingman, Arizona, blood seeping through his fingers as he pressed them against the wound. It was 1878, the height of summer, and the desert sun beat down mercilessly on his bare head as he collapsed against a hitching post, his vision swimming. He had ridden 3 days straight to escape the men who wanted him dead for a crime he did not commit, and now he had nowhere left to run. The town spun around him, faces blurring past, and not a single person stopped to help the bleeding stranger who had brought trouble to their doorstep. Theresa Langford watched from the second-floor window of the boarding house where she worked, her hands gripping the faded curtains as she observed the man fall to his knees in the street below. She was 23 years old and had been in Kingman for 2 years, ever since her father had died and left her with nothing but debt and a tarnished reputation. The boarding house owner, Mrs. Graves, paid her barely enough to survive, and Theresa spent her days scrubbing floors and changing linens, her nights staring at the ceiling and wondering if this hollow existence was all that remained of her life. She had no family, no prospects, no reason to wake up each morning except that her body insisted on continuing to breathe. But something about the man in the street called to her. Perhaps it was the desperate way he tried to stand, only to collapse again. Perhaps it was the fact that everyone else turned away, pretending not to see. Perhaps it was simply that for the first time in 2 years, she felt something other than numbness. Theresa moved before she could think better of it, rushing down the narrow staircase and out into the blinding sunlight. The heat hit her like a physical force, but she ignored it, hurrying to where the man lay slumped against the wooden post. Up close, she could see he was young, maybe 25, with dark hair plastered to his forehead with sweat and pain etched deep into his weathered face. "Can you stand?" she asked, her voice rougher than she intended from disuse. She so rarely spoke to anyone. His eyes opened, startlingly blue against his tanned skin. "I can try," he managed, his voice thick with pain. Theresa looked around the street, but no one met her gaze. The sheriff's office stood just 50 yards away, but she had learned long ago that the law in Kingman served whoever paid them most. Something told her this man would find no help there. She made a decision that would change everything. "Put your arm around my shoulders," she instructed, surprised by the authority in her own voice. "There is a room in the back of the boarding house. No one uses it." Mason tried to protest, tried to tell her she should stay away from him, that helping him would only bring her trouble. But the words would not come, and the woman was stronger than she looked. Together they stumbled down the street, into the alley beside the boarding house, and through a door that led to a small storage room filled with broken furniture and dust. Theresa eased him down onto an old mattress, ignoring the cloud of dust that rose around them. "I need to see the wound," she said, already reaching for his blood-soaked shirt. Mason caught her wrist with his good hand. "Why are you helping me?" The question hung in the stale air between them. Theresa met his eyes and found she did not have a simple answer. "Because no one else would," she finally said. "And because I know what it feels like to have nowhere to turn." She pulled her wrist free and began unbuttoning his shirt, her fingers steady despite the intimacy of the action. The wound was in his left shoulder, the bullet still lodged deep in the muscle. She had helped her father with injuries before, back when he had been the town doctor in their small Kansas settlement. That felt like a lifetime ago. "This is going to hurt," she warned. And then she was moving with practiced efficiency, gathering the supplies she would need. A bottle of whiskey from the kitchen, clean rags torn from an old sheet, her father's medical kit that she had carried with her all this way, unable to part with the last remnant of her old life. Mason gritted his teeth as she cleaned the wound, as she dug out the bullet with steady hands, as she stitched him closed with neat, precise movements. He did not cry out, but sweat poured down his face and his hands clenched into fists. Through it all, Theresa worked in focused silence, falling into the rhythm of a skill she had thought she would never use again. When it was done, she sat back on her heels, exhausted. "You need rest," she said. "And water, I will bring you both. Wait." His hand caught hers again, gentler this time. "Thank you, I do not even know your name." "Theresa," she said. "Theresa Langford. Mason Novak." He paused, and she could see him struggling with whether to tell her more. "I did not do what they are accusing me of." Theresa studied his face, the honest desperation in his eyes, and found that she believed him. "What did they accuse you of?" "Murder," Mason said flatly. "A rancher named Caldwell was killed 3 weeks ago outside of Prescott. I worked for him and I found the body. By the time I rode back to the ranch for help, someone had already told the sheriff I did it. I ran because I knew I would hang before I ever got a fair trial." The story rang true in a way that settled something in Theresa's chest. She had seen enough injustice in her own life to recognize it in others. "Then you will need time to heal before you can prove your innocence," she said practically. "I will help you." Mason looked at her with something like wonder. "You do not even know me. Why would you risk yourself for a stranger?" Theresa stood, brushing dust from her plain brown skirt. "Because for 2 years I have been going through the motions of living without having any reason to. Because you needed help and had no one to turn to. Because maybe helping you will remind me what it feels like to have a purpose again." She left before he could respond, slipping back into the main building of the boarding house. Her heart pounded as she realized what she had done, the risk she had taken. But underneath the fear was something else, something she had not felt in so long she almost did not recognize it. Hope. Over the next 3 days, Theresa tended to Mason in secret, bringing him food and water, changing his bandages, watching as color slowly returned to his face. She told Mrs. Graves she was cleaning out the storage room, and the old woman was too pleased at the prospect of extra space to ask questions. During the long hours when Theresa sat beside Mason's makeshift bed, they talked in low voices, sharing pieces of their lives like puzzle pieces that somehow fit together. Mason told her about growing up in Texas, about learning to work cattle from his father before a fever took both his parents within a week of each other, when he was 16. He told her about drifting from ranch to ranch, about the honest work of herding cattle and breaking horses, about the simple satisfaction of a job well done. He told her about Caldwell, who had been a fair boss and a decent man, and how Mason had planned to save enough money to buy his own small spread someday. Theresa told him about her father, the brilliant doctor who had loved her mother so much that, when she died in childbirth, something in him had broken. She told him about moving from town to town as her father drank away his practice and his reputation, about learning medicine at his side during his sober moments, about holding his hand when the drink finally killed him. She told him about the debts he had left behind, about the men who had looked at her with hunger in their eyes when they realized she was alone, about fleeing to Kingman with nothing but the clothes on her back and her father's medical bag. "I used to dream of opening a clinic," she admitted on the 3rd night, her voice barely above a whisper in the darkness. "Of using what my father taught me to help people. But a woman practicing medicine alone with no money and no reputation. It was an impossible dream." Mason shifted on the mattress, his shoulder still too painful for him to sit up properly. "Why impossible?" he asked. "You saved my life. You have steady hands and a good heart. That seems like exactly what a doctor needs." Theresa laughed, but it was a bitter sound. "A doctor needs money for supplies, for an office. A doctor needs the respect of the community. I have neither of those things. I am just a woman who scrubs floors in a boarding house." "You are more than that," Mason said with such quiet conviction that Theresa felt something crack open in her chest. "You are the woman who risked everything to help a stranger. You are the woman who gave me a reason to keep fighting." Their eyes met in the dim light filtering through the grimy window, and Theresa felt the air between them change, become charged with something she could not name. She stood abruptly, her cheeks flushing. "I should let you rest," she said, and fled before he could see how much his words had affected her. On the fourth day, everything changed. Theresa arrived with Mason's breakfast to find him standing, testing his weight carefully as he stretched his healing shoulder. He had removed his blood-stained shirt and wore only his undershirt, and Theresa found herself noticing the lean strength of his frame, the determined set of his jaw. "You should not be up yet," she scolded, but she could not keep the relief from her voice. He was healing faster than she had dared hope. "I have been lying down for 4 days," Mason said. "If I do not move, I will go mad." He turned to face her fully, and the intensity in his blue eyes made her breath catch. "Besides, I cannot hide in this room forever. I need to find a way to clear my name, and I cannot do that from here." Theresa set down the plate of bread and dried meat she had brought. "If you go out there now, they will catch you. You are still weak, and you are a wanted man. You need more time." "I do not have more time," Mason said, frustration evident in every line of his body. "Every day I hide is another day they believe I am guilty. I need to find out who really killed Caldwell before the trail goes completely cold." "Then let me help you," Theresa said, the words spilling out before she could stop them. "I can move through town without suspicion. I can ask questions, gather information. Let me be your eyes and ears until you are strong enough to move freely." Mason stared at her. "You have already done too much. I cannot ask you to put yourself in more danger." "You are not asking, I am offering." Theresa moved closer, her chin lifted in defiance. "You said I gave you a reason to keep fighting. Well, you have given me something too. For the first time in 2 years, I feel like I matter. Like what I do makes a difference. Do not take that away from me now." The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words. Then Mason reached out with his good arm and gently touched her cheek, his calloused fingers rough against her skin. "How did I get so lucky," he murmured, "to have you find me?" Theresa's heart hammered against her ribs. She knew she should step back, should maintain the distance between patient and caretaker. But instead, she found herself leaning into his touch, her eyes drifting closed for just a moment. "I think maybe I was the lucky one," she whispered. When she opened her eyes, Mason was looking at her with such raw emotion that it stole her breath. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned down and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle, tentative, a question more than a statement. Theresa answered by rising on her toes, her hands coming up to rest against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her palms. They broke apart after a moment that felt both endless and far too brief. Theresa's cheeks burned, but she did not regret it. Could not regret the way her whole body felt alive for the first time in years. "I am sorry," Mason said, though he did not sound sorry at all. "That was forward of me." "Do not apologize," Theresa replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "But we should focus on keeping you alive before we think about anything else." Mason nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Then tell me your plan." They spent the next hour strategizing, their heads bent close together as they worked out the details. Theresa would start by visiting the general store, where the owner's wife loved to gossip. She would ask casual questions about what news had come from Prescott, about whether anyone had heard about the Caldwell murder. She would listen carefully to everything people said, looking for any detail that might help them figure out who had really committed the crime. That afternoon, Theresa put their plan into action. She walked through Kingman's dusty streets with her head high, forcing herself to smile and make small talk with the people she usually avoided. At the general store, Mrs. Patterson was happy to chat, especially when Theresa bought a tin of expensive tea she could barely afford. "Oh, such terrible business up in Prescott," Mrs. Patterson said, leaning across the counter conspiratorially. "They say that cowboy who killed Mr. Caldwell is still on the run. Can you imagine? A murderer could be anywhere." "I heard about that," Theresa said carefully. "Did they say why he did it?" "Money, of course. Mr. Caldwell was a wealthy man. They say his safe was found empty and that cowboy, what was his name, Novak, he disappeared the same night." Mrs. Patterson shook her head. "I heard the sheriff in Prescott put a $200 reward on his head. Someone will turn him in soon enough." Theresa's blood ran cold at the mention of the reward, but she kept her expression neutral. $200 is a lot of money," she said. "I am surprised no one has found him yet." "Well, he is probably halfway to Mexico by now," Mrs. Patterson said with certainty. "That is what I would do if I were a killer on the run." Theresa gathered a few more scraps of information before making her excuses and leaving. She visited 2 more shops, the saloon, and even dared to walk past the sheriff's office, ears straining to catch any useful conversation. By the time she returned to the boarding house as the sun was setting, she had pieced together a clearer picture of what had happened. Mason listened intently as she relayed everything she had learned. "So they are saying Caldwell's safe was robbed," he said thoughtfully. "But when I found his body, the safe in his office was still closed. I remember because I thought it was strange that he had been killed outside, near the bunkhouse, instead of in his office where he kept his valuables." "Then whoever killed him did not do it for money," Theresa said, her mind racing. "Or they were interrupted before they could get to the safe." "But if that is true, why did the sheriff say it was empty?" "Because someone opened it after I left," Mason said slowly. "Someone who wanted it to look like a robbery so they could frame me for it." "You have any idea who would want Caldwell dead?" Theresa asked. "Did he have enemies?" Mason was quiet for a long moment, his brow furrowed in concentration. "There was a man," he finally said. "Caldwell's brother-in-law, Frank Winters. He managed Caldwell's finances, and I know there had been arguments between them in the weeks before the murder. I heard shouting coming from the office a few times, though I never knew what it was about." "A brother-in-law who managed his money," Theresa repeated. "That is worth investigating, but how can we prove anything from here?" They talked late into the night, developing a plan that made Theresa's stomach clench with anxiety even as her pulse quickened with excitement. It was dangerous, possibly foolish, but it was also their best chance. They would need to get to Prescott, to find evidence that pointed to the real killer. But Mason could not travel yet, not safely, and they would need supplies, horses, and money they did not have. Over the next week, Theresa worked harder than she ever had in her life. She took on extra work at the boarding house, mending clothes and washing laundry for the guests. She sold the few possessions she had left from her old life, including her mother's silver locket, the only thing of value she owned. Each coin she saved was a step closer to their goal, and each night when she returned to the storage room, Mason was there waiting, his eyes lighting up at the sight of her in a way that made her feel precious and seen. They grew closer in those stolen hours, sharing not just plans but dreams, fears, and laughter that felt like a rebellion against the hardship of their lives. Mason told her about the ranch he wanted to build someday, a modest spread where he could raise cattle and horses, where he could work with his hands and watch the sun rise over land that belonged to him. Theresa told him about the clinic she had given up hoping for and was startled when Mason said, "Why give up? When this is over, when my name is cleared, we could build both those dreams. Together." The word together hung in the air between them, full of promise and possibility. Theresa wanted to believe it, wanted to let herself hope for a future that included more than just survival. But she was also terrified, because caring for Mason meant she had something to lose again, and she was not sure she could survive another loss. On the 9th day, disaster nearly struck. Mrs. Graves decided she wanted to see the progress Theresa had made in the storage room, and Theresa barely had time to warn Mason to hide behind a stack of old furniture before the old woman pushed open the door. Theresa's heart pounded so hard she thought it might burst from her chest as Mrs. Graves looked around the still cluttered space with obvious disappointment. "This is what you have been doing all week," the old woman demanded. "It looks the same as it did before." "I have been sorting through everything," Theresa said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Deciding what can be salvaged and what should be thrown away. It is slow work." Mrs. Graves made a sound of displeasure. "Well, work faster. I want this space cleared out by the end of the month." She turned to leave, then paused. "And Theresa, you look tired. Are you feeling well?" "I am fine," Theresa lied. "Just working hard." After Mrs. Graves left, Mason emerged from his hiding spot, his face pale. "That was too close," he said. "Theresa, if she had found me, you would have been implicated. You could have been arrested for harboring a fugitive." "But she did not find you," Theresa said firmly, though her hands were shaking. "We just need to be more careful." But the close call had shaken them both, and that night they agreed it was time to act. Mason's shoulder was not fully healed, but it was healed enough. They had saved almost $30 between them, enough to buy 2 horses and basic supplies if they were careful. The next morning, before dawn, they would leave Kingman and head north to Prescott, where they would search for the evidence that could prove Mason's innocence. Their last night in the storage room felt weighted with significance. They sat close together on the old mattress, neither wanting to sleep, both knowing that everything was about to change. Mason took Theresa's hand in his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm. "I need you to know something," he said quietly. "These past days with you, they have been the best of my life despite everything. You make me want to be the kind of man who deserves you." Theresa felt tears prick her eyes. "You already are that man," she said. "You are brave and honest and good. You could have kept running, could have left the territory and started over somewhere far away. But instead you are choosing to fight for your name, to prove your innocence. That takes courage." "I am not doing it just for me anymore," Mason admitted. "I am doing it for us. Because I want a future where I can court you properly, where I can offer you more than hiding in storage rooms and running from the law. You deserve a real life, Theresa. You deserve to have that clinic, to use your gift for healing without being afraid." "I want that too," Theresa whispered. "I want it so much it scares me." Mason cupped her face in his hands, his blue eyes intense in the dim light. "Then let us fight for it together. Whatever happens, we face it together." He kissed her then, and this time there was nothing tentative about it. This was a kiss that spoke of promises and passion, of 2 people who had found in each other something worth risking everything for. Theresa kissed him back with all the emotion she had kept locked away for so long, letting herself feel the hope and fear and love that threatened to overwhelm her. They broke apart breathless, and Theresa rested her forehead against Mason's chest, listening to the steady thunder of his heartbeat. "Whatever happens," she echoed, "together." They left Kingman before sunrise, riding out of town on 2 horses Theresa had bought from a farmer on the outskirts using most of their savings. Mason wore clothes she had stolen from the boarding house, a worn hat pulled low over his face. They followed the dusty roads north toward Prescott, traveling mostly at night and resting during the hottest parts of the day to avoid being seen. The journey took 3 days of hard riding, and by the time they reached the outskirts of Prescott, both of them were exhausted and covered in dust. But there was also an energy between them, a sense of purpose that kept them moving forward. They made camp in a small grove of cottonwoods near a creek, and Mason outlined his plan. "The Caldwell Ranch is about 5 miles east of town," he said, sketching a rough map in the dirt with a stick. "If we can get onto the property after dark, I might be able to find something the sheriff missed, and I want to talk to some of the other ranch hands if I can. Someone must have seen something that night." "And if we are caught?" Theresa asked. "Then we run," Mason said simply. "But I do not plan on getting caught." They waited until full dark before approaching the ranch, leaving their horses hidden in a dry wash. Mason led the way with the confidence of someone who knew every inch of the property, and Theresa followed close behind, her heart in her throat. The ranch house was dark, but lights burned in the bunkhouse where the cowboys slept. Mason headed not for the main buildings but for a small shed near the corral. "This is where Caldwell kept his records," he whispered to Theresa. "If there was something wrong with the finances, if Frank Winters was stealing from him, there might be evidence here." The shed door was locked, but Mason produced a knife and worked at the latch until it gave way with a soft click. Inside, the shed smelled of dust and old paper. Mason lit the small lantern they had brought, keeping the light low as he began searching through the filing cabinets and desk drawers. Theresa kept watch at the door, her eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of movement. Time seemed to crawl by, every sound magnified in the quiet night. Just when she was about to tell Mason they needed to leave, he made a soft sound of triumph. "Look at this," he said, holding up a ledger book. "These are Caldwell's financial records for the past year, and look at these entries here and here. Large sums being withdrawn regularly, but the notations do not make sense. Equipment repairs for amounts that are far too high. Stock purchases, when I know for a fact we did not buy any new cattle during those months. Someone was embezzling from him," Theresa breathed. "Frank Winters." "It has to be," Mason said grimly. "And when Caldwell figured it out, Winters killed him to keep him quiet. Then he took whatever cash was in the safe and made it look like a robbery gone wrong." "We need to get this ledger to the authorities," Theresa said. "This is proof that someone had a motive to kill Caldwell besides you." But before Mason could respond, the shed door burst open and 3 men with guns poured in. Theresa screamed as rough hands grabbed her, pulling her away from Mason. She saw Mason reach for the gun he had bought in Kingman, saw the flash of violence in his eyes, but then more men were there, overwhelming him with sheer numbers. "Well, well," said a cold voice from the doorway. "Mason Novak, I heard you might be stupid enough to come back here." A man stepped into the flickering lamplight, and Theresa felt Mason go rigid beside her. The newcomer was in his 40s, well-dressed and handsome in a cold way, with eyes like chips of ice. "Frank Winters," Mason spat the name like a curse. "The very same," Winters said with a smile that did not reach his eyes. "And who is this lovely young lady? Your accomplice?" His gaze slid over Theresa in a way that made her skin crawl. "Leave her out of this," Mason said, his voice low and dangerous. "She has nothing to do with any of this." "Oh, I think she has everything to do with it," Winters said. "After all, she is here with you, helping you break into my property." "Yes, my property. My dear sister made me her sole heir when Caldwell died. Convenient, was it not?" Theresa felt cold dread settle in her stomach. This man was not just a thief and a murderer. He was clever and ruthless, and he clearly had no qualms about killing again to protect his secrets. "The sheriff will want to see you both," Winters continued. Though I must warn you, he is not inclined to be sympathetic. After all, everyone knows Mason Novak killed my brother-in-law. Coming back here just proves your guilt. We have evidence, Theresa said, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. That ledger shows you were stealing from Caldwell. It gives you a motive for murder. Winters laughed, a genuinely amused sound. That ledger? You mean this one? He plucked the book from where Mason had dropped it and held it up. Then, casually, he tossed it into the lantern. The oil caught immediately, flames licking up the pages and spreading to the other papers in the shed. No. Mason lunged forward, but the men holding him yanked him back. The fire spread quickly, consuming years of records in minutes. Winters and his men backed out of the shed, dragging Mason and Theresa with them, as the flames engulfed everything. Such a shame, Winters said, watching the shed burn. There goes your evidence. Now it is just your word against mine, and I think we both know whose word will carry more weight. They were thrown into a wagon and driven into Prescott, where the sheriff, a heavy-set man named Kingman, greeted Winters like an old friend. Theresa realized with sinking certainty that Winters had the law in his pocket, that they had walked into a trap with no way out. She and Mason were locked in separate cells in the jailhouse, and Theresa spent the longest night of her life listening to Mason calling her name, telling her that everything would be all right, that he would find a way to fix this. But she could hear the desperation in his voice, and she knew that unless something changed, Mason would hang for a murder he did not commit, and she would either hang beside him or spend the rest of her life in prison. But Theresa had not survived the loss of both parents, 2 years of grinding poverty, and the risks of the past weeks just to give up now. As dawn light began filtering through the barred window of her cell, she started to think, there had to be a way out of this. There had to be someone in this town who cared more about justice than about money or influence. When Sheriff Kingman came to bring her breakfast, a measly plate of beans and hard bread, Theresa took a chance. "Sheriff," she said quietly, "did you know Samuel Caldwell personally?" Kingman paused, his hand on the cell bars. "I did. He was a good man." "Then you owe it to him to find his real killer," Theresa pressed. "Frank Winters was embezzling from him. That is why he killed him. Mason Novak is innocent." "You have no proof of that," Kingman said, but there was something in his voice, a hesitation that gave Theresa hope. "We had proof, but Winters burned it," Theresa said. "Last night when he and his men caught us at the ranch. He set fire to the shed where Caldwell kept his financial records, rather than let us bring them to you. Does not that tell you something?" Kingman was quiet for a long moment. "Frank said that shed caught fire because you two were trying to destroy evidence of Novak's crime. And you believed him." Theresa met the sheriff's eyes squarely. "Sheriff, I am a stranger here and I have no reason to lie. But I have every reason to tell the truth, because the man in that other cell is the best person I have ever known, and I will not let him die for something he did not do. Frank Winters is a murderer and a thief. If you hang Mason, you will be killing an innocent man and letting the real killer go free." She could see the doubt in Coleman's eyes, could see him wavering. "Even if what you say is true," he said slowly, "I have no evidence. Winters is a respected man in this town. I cannot accuse him without proof." "Then help us find proof," Theresa urged. "Talk to the other ranch hands. Ask them if they noticed anything strange the night Caldwell died. Check Caldwell's bank records. See if they match up with what Winters claims was in the safe. Something does not add up, and you know it. You just have to be willing to look." Kingman left without another word, but Theresa thought she had gotten through to him at least a little. She had to hope it was enough. The day passed with agonizing slowness. Theresa could hear Mason in the next cell, could hear him pacing restlessly, and she wished desperately that she could see him, touch him, reassure herself that he was all right. She thought about all the things she wanted to say to him, all the moments they had not yet shared, and she refused to believe that their story would end here. As afternoon faded into evening, Sheriff Coleman returned. This time he was not alone. With him was a young cowboy who looked nervous but determined. "This is Billy Crawford," Coleman said. "He worked at the Caldwell Ranch. He has something to say." Billy stepped forward, twisting his hat in his hands. "I saw Mr. Winters at the ranch the night Mr. Caldwell died," he said in a rush. "I was supposed to be on watch with the cattle, but I came back to the bunkhouse early because I was not feeling well. I saw Mr. Winters' horse tied up near the main house, which was strange because it was late. Then I heard shouting and I saw Mr. Winters and Mr. Caldwell arguing outside. I could not hear what they were saying, but Mr. Caldwell was angry, real angry." "Why did you not say this before?" Theresa asked, gripping the bars of her cell. Billy looked ashamed. "Because Mr. Winters came to see me the next day, after Mr. Caldwell's body was found. He gave me $50 and told me to forget I had seen him there. He said if I told anyone, he would make sure I never worked in this territory again. I needed the money, and I was scared, so I kept quiet. But then I heard you two were arrested, and I could not live with myself anymore. Mr. Novak is a good man. He does not deserve to hang for something he did not do." Sheriff Coleman unlocked Theresa's cell door. "I also went to the bank," he said. "Caldwell had over $3,000 in his account just last month, but Winters claims the safe only had $500 in it when it was supposedly robbed. The numbers do not match up. I think you might be right about Winters." Relief flooded through Theresa so strongly her knees nearly buckled. "Does this mean you will let us go?" "It means I am going to question Frank Winters," Coleman said. "And depending on what he says, yes, I will likely be releasing you and Novak." He paused. "I am sorry I did not listen sooner." Sometimes it is easier to believe the simple story than to dig for the truth. Within the hour, Theresa and Mason were free, standing together in the sheriff's office as the sun set outside. Mason pulled Theresa into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe, and she did not care. They had survived. They had won. Over the next few days, the truth came out piece by piece. Faced with Billy Crawford's testimony and the discrepancies in the financial records, Frank Winters confessed to killing Samuel Caldwell. He had been embezzling from his brother-in-law for over a year, and when Caldwell discovered the theft, Winters had killed him in a moment of panic. He had then staged the crime scene to make it look like a robbery, and when Mason had the bad luck to discover the body, Winters had seen an opportunity to frame him for the murder. Winters was arrested and held for trial, and Mason's name was cleared. The relief was overwhelming, but it was also bittersweet, because now they had to figure out what came next. They stayed in Prescott for a week while the legal matters were resolved, staying in a modest hotel and slowly allowing themselves to believe that the nightmare was truly over. One evening, as they sat together on the porch of the hotel watching the stars come out, Mason took Theresa's hand in his. "I have been thinking," he said, "about what we do now. The ranch hands at Caldwell's place told me that his sister, Winters' wife, wants nothing to do with the property. She is selling it, and the price is fair. I could use the reward money that would have gone to whoever caught me, except now it is being paid to me for proving my innocence, plus the wages Caldwell owed me. It is not quite enough to buy the ranch, but it is close." Theresa's heart began to beat faster. "Are you saying what I think you are saying?" "I am saying we could have that ranch, Theresa. We could build the life we talked about. I could raise cattle and horses, and you could open your clinic." There is a building in town that used to be a doctor's office, sitting empty since old Doc Harrison died. We could make this work. Together. Together, Theresa repeated, the word tasting like a promise. Mason, are you asking me to marry you? Mason slid off his chair and knelt before her on the dusty porch, his blue eyes bright with hope and love. Theresa Langford, I know we have not known each other long. I know that most of that time has been spent running and hiding and fighting for our lives. But I also know that you are the bravest, kindest, most extraordinary woman I have ever met. You saved my life, not just by treating my wound, but by giving me a reason to keep fighting. You make me want to be better, to build something lasting and good. I love you, Theresa. Will you marry me? Tears streamed down Theresa's face, but they were tears of joy. Yes, she said, laughing and crying at the same time. Yes, I will marry you. I love you too, Mason. I think I have loved you since that first moment when you asked me why I was helping you, and I realized that you had given me back my purpose. Mason stood and kissed her there on the porch, and Theresa felt like her heart might burst from happiness. After so many years of loss and loneliness, she had found someone who saw her, truly saw her, and loved her for exactly who she was. They were married a week later in a small church in Prescott, with Sheriff Coleman and Billy Crawford standing as witnesses. Theresa wore a simple blue dress that Mason had bought for her, and Mason wore a new suit that made him look handsome and respectable. The ceremony was short but heartfelt, and when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Theresa felt like she was stepping into a new life, one filled with possibility and hope. With the reward money and a loan from the bank, they bought the Caldwell Ranch and renamed it the Novak Ranch. It was hard work getting the place running again, but Mason threw himself into it with the determination of a man who finally had something to work for beyond simple survival. He hired back some of the ranch hands who had worked for Caldwell, including Billy Crawford, who proved to be a loyal and hardworking employee. Theresa, meanwhile, opened her clinic in the old doctor's office in town. At first, people were skeptical of a woman doctor, but when a rancher's son broke his arm and Theresa said it with practiced skill, word began to spread. Soon, she had patients coming from all over the area, seeking treatment for everything from injuries to illnesses. She used the medical knowledge her father had taught her, and she added to it with books she ordered from back east, determined to be the best doctor she could be. The first year of their marriage was not easy. There were times when money was tight, when the cattle market was bad, or when patients could not pay for her services. There were times when Mason's shoulder ached from the old bullet wound, and times when Theresa woke in the night from dreams of being locked in that jail cell, certain that it had all been too good to be true. But through it all, they had each other. On the hard days, Mason would ride into town to walk Theresa home from the clinic, and they would talk about their day, sharing the small triumphs and frustrations. On the good days, they would sit together on the porch of their ranch house, watching the sun set over their land, marveling at how far they had come. In their second year of marriage, Theresa realized she was pregnant. The news filled her with a joy she had never imagined possible, and Mason was so excited he picked her up and spun her around until she was dizzy and laughing. They spent the next months preparing for the baby, Mason building a cradle with his own hands while Theresa sewed tiny clothes. Their son was born on a cold November night in 1880, with the help of a midwife from town. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Theresa was afraid, but Mason stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand and telling her she was strong, she could do this. When their baby finally arrived, red-faced and wailing, Theresa wept with relief and overwhelming love. They named him Samuel, after Mason's father and the man whose death had brought them together in a strange way. Little Samuel had his father's blue eyes and his mother's determination, and from the moment he was born, he wrapped both his parents completely around his tiny fingers. Watching Mason with their son, seeing the gentle way he held the baby and the fierce protective love in his eyes, Theresa fell in love with him all over again. This was the man who had needed help and had no one to turn to, and he had become the most devoted father and husband she could have imagined. 2 years later, they had a daughter. Emma arrived on a warm spring morning, and she was the perfect complement to her energetic older brother. Where Samuel was bold and adventurous, Emma was thoughtful and gentle. The ranch house filled with the sounds of children laughing and playing, and Theresa could hardly remember what her life had been like before this, before the fullness and purpose that now defined her days. The clinic thrived, and Theresa became known throughout the territory as a skilled and compassionate doctor. People traveled from far and wide to seek her treatment, and she trained several young women who wanted to learn medicine, passing on her father's knowledge to a new generation. She thought often of her father during those days, and she liked to believe he would have been proud of what she had built. The ranch prospered too. Mason expanded their herds and earned a reputation for raising quality cattle and breaking the finest horses in the territory. He was respected by his fellow ranchers and loved by his family, and the bitterness of his wrongful accusation faded into a distant memory, replaced by the satisfaction of honest work and a life well lived. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Mason and Theresa rode out to the place where it had all started, the spot in Kingman where he had collapsed in the street and she had made the decision to help him. The town looked the same, dusty and unremarkable, but to them it was sacred ground. "Do you ever regret it?" Mason asked, holding her hand as they stood in the street. "Helping me that day? Your life could have been so much simpler if you had just walked away." Theresa looked at her husband, at the man who had given her back her life and her purpose, who had made her a mother and a wife and a doctor, who loved her with a steadiness that still took her breath away. "Not for a single moment," she said firmly. "You needed help and had no one to turn to. I needed purpose. We found everything we were looking for in each other." Mason pulled her close and kissed her there in the street, and Theresa tasted the future in that kiss, all the years stretching ahead of them, full of love and work and family. They had built something beautiful out of desperation and danger, had forged a love that could withstand anything. As they rode back toward Prescott, toward home and their children and the life they had created together, Theresa thought about the woman she had been 5 years ago, hollow and lost and going through the motions of living. She thought about Mason, bleeding and desperate in the street, with nowhere to turn. And she thought about how sometimes the bravest thing you can do is take a chance on a stranger, because you never know when that stranger might turn out to be the answer to every question you have been asking. Years continued to pass in comfortable rhythm. The Novak ranch became one of the most successful in the territory, and Theresa's clinic expanded to include a small hospital wing where she could treat more serious injuries and illnesses. Samuel grew into a responsible young man who loved working the ranch with his father, and Emma discovered a passion for medicine, spending hours at the clinic watching her mother work and asking endless questions. In 1890, when Samuel was 10 and Emma was 8, they welcomed another child, a daughter they named Grace. Her arrival was unexpected but joyous, and she brought a new energy to the household. Mason joked that she had the stubbornness of both her parents combined, and Theresa could not disagree. One evening when Grace was 3 years old, the family gathered on the porch as they often did, watching the Arizona sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Samuel was talking about a new horse he was training. Emma was reading aloud from a medical journal Theresa had received from back east, and Grace was curled up in Mason's lap, fighting sleep. Theresa looked around at her family, at the life they had built together, and felt a contentment so deep it was almost painful. This was everything she had never dared to dream of. Everything she had thought was impossible. That day she had looked out the boarding house window and seen a bleeding stranger in the street. Mason caught her looking and smiled, that same smile that had captured her heart all those years ago. "What are you thinking about?" he asked quietly. "Just how lucky I am," Theresa said. "How lucky we both are." "Not luck," Mason said, reaching out to take her hand while still holding their sleeping daughter. "Choice. You chose to help me when you had every reason not to. I chose to trust you when I had no reason to trust anyone. We chose each other, and we keep choosing each other every single day." Theresa squeezed his hand, feeling the calluses from years of ranch work, the strength and gentleness that defined him. "I will keep choosing you," she promised. "Every day for the rest of my life." As the sun disappeared below the horizon and the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, the Novak family sat together in perfect harmony. They had traveled a long road from that desperate day in Kingman, through danger and fear and uncertainty, to reach this moment of peace and abundance. Mason Novak had needed help and had no one to turn to, and Theresa Langford had needed purpose and a reason to keep going. They had found everything they were searching for in each other, and in doing so, they had built not just a life but a legacy of love, determination, and courage that would endure for generations. Their story was one of second chances and bravery, of two broken people who had found wholeness in each other's arms. It was a story of the Wild West, of hard work and harder choices, of justice and redemption. But most of all, it was a love story, pure and simple, the kind that reminded everyone who heard it that sometimes the most extraordinary things begin with a single act of kindness, a moment of courage, a decision to reach out to someone in need even when it would be easier to look away. And as Mason and Theresa grew old together, surrounded by their children and eventually their grandchildren, they never forgot that first moment when their eyes had met in a dusty street, when she had asked if he could stand, and he had said he could try. That moment had changed everything, had set them both on a path that led to more joy and fulfillment than either had thought possible. They had needed each other, and they had found each other, and that made all the difference. Their love story became legend in Prescott, told and retold as an example of how love can bloom in the most unlikely circumstances, how two people who have nothing can build everything together. It was a story of hope triumphing over despair, of love conquering fear, of two souls finding their way home to each other against all odds. And every time they told the story to their children and grandchildren, they always ended it the same way. Mason would look at Theresa with eyes still bright with love after all those years, and he would say, "I needed help and had no one to turn to." And Theresa would take his hand and reply, "And I needed purpose. We found everything we needed in each other." Then they would smile, remembering, grateful for every moment of the beautiful life they had built together, grateful for that one day when fate had brought them together, and they had been brave enough to take a chance on love.